It started on a Tuesday morning in March when Ethan was driving to work and heard a voice tell him to turn left instead of right. Before that moment, his life had been ordinary in every measurable way. He worked in an office doing something with spreadsheets and quarterly reports that he found neither interesting nor terrible. He lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of the curry the neighbors cooked 3 times a week. He had acquaintances but not close friends. He had routines but not passions. He existed in that middle space where most people live, not happy enough to feel grateful and not unhappy enough to change anything. He made small decisions every day, hundreds of them, and most of them were wrong in ways too minor to notice. He chose the slow line at the grocery store. He said the wrong thing in meetings. He bought things he did not need and forgot things he did. His life was a series of tiny miscalculations that added up to nothing in particular. And then one Tuesday morning in March the voice spoke and everything changed. It started on a Tuesday morning in March when Ethan was driving to work and heard a voice tell him to turn left instead of right. The voice was calm, neutral, almost forgettable in its tone, like someone reading a grocery list or announcing the time. It did not sound angry or urgent or desperate. It simply said turn left and then it was gone. Ethan turned left without thinking much about it, the way you might scratch an itch or adjust your collar, something so small it barely registered as a decision. He took the alternate route through the residential streets, past the old elementary school and the park where he used to walk his dog before the dog died. The drive took 3 minutes longer than usual. When he arrived at work, his coworker mentioned that there had been an accident on his usual route. A semi-truck had jackknifed and blocked both lanes. Traffic had been stopped for almost an hour. Ethan thought about the voice then, just briefly, but he did not think much of it. It felt like a coincidence. Nothing more. The second time it happened, he was at the grocery store, standing in the cereal aisle with his hand reaching for a box of granola. He had been thinking about whether to buy the store brand or the name brand, a decision so insignificant it barely registered as thinking, when the voice came through the hum of the refrigerator units, soft and even, like it had always been there and he was only now noticing it. It said wait. Just that one word, spoken with the same neutral tone as before, like an announcement on a train platform or the automated voice in an elevator. Ethan pulled his hand back and stood there feeling slightly foolish, looking around to see if anyone was watching him. No one was. The other shoppers moved past him with their carts and their lists and their own small decisions, oblivious to the fact that he was standing motionless in the cereal aisle for no reason he could explain. He waited for maybe 20 seconds, long enough to feel the awkwardness of standing still in a grocery store aisle for no reason, and then a woman pushing a cart came around the corner too fast, distracted by her phone, and knocked into the shelf where Ethan had been reaching. The boxes tumbled down, some of them hitting the floor, one of them landing exactly where his hand would have been. The woman apologized and kept moving. Ethan picked up the fallen boxes and put them back on the shelf and left the aisle without buying anything. His hand was shaking slightly. Not from fear but from something else, something like recognition. He thought about the voice again. He wondered if he had heard it or if he had imagined it. He wondered if it mattered. He wondered what would have happened if he had not listened. Would the box have hit his hand? Would it have hurt? Or would nothing have happened at all and he was simply creating patterns in randomness, seeing protection where there was only coincidence? He did not know. He could not know. But the voice had been right. That was the thing he kept coming back to as he finished his shopping and drove home and put away his groceries. The voice had been right. Over the next few weeks the voice came more often. It did not announce itself. It did not explain. It simply appeared in the background noise of his life, threaded through the static of his car radio, the buzz of the air conditioning, the distant murmur of conversations he was not part of. Sometimes it came when he was alone, other times when he was surrounded by people. It never raised its volume. It never repeated itself. It gave him small instructions, simple directions, things that required almost no effort to follow. Do not take that call. Wait here for 2 minutes. Cross the street now. Leave this room. Each time he followed the instructions, something small and bad did not happen. A call he did not take turned out to be a scammer. The 2 minutes he waited allowed a confrontation in the hallway to resolve itself before he walked into it. Crossing the street when the voice told him to meant he avoided walking under a loose air conditioning unit that fell 30 seconds later. Leaving the room meant he was not present when his manager began shouting at someone else. Ethan began to listen for the voice. He started paying attention to the spaces between sounds, the moments when the world went briefly quiet, because that was often when the voice would speak. He did not tell anyone about it. How could he? What would he say? That he was hearing a voice that gave him helpful advice. That something or someone was guiding him through his days, steering him away from minor disasters and uncomfortable situations. It sounded insane even in his own head. But the voice was always right. Every single time he followed its instructions, something bad was prevented, something unpleasant was avoided, something easier took its place. His life became smoother, calmer. He stopped getting into arguments. He stopped missing appointments. He stopped making small mistakes that cascaded into larger problems. It felt like he had finally figured something out, like he had been given a cheat code to existence. He started documenting it in a journal he kept hidden in his desk drawer. Not the instructions themselves but the outcomes. Tuesday, avoided traffic jam. Thursday, did not answer scam call. Saturday, left party before fight broke out. The list grew longer. The patterns became clearer. The voice was protecting him from something, or perhaps from everything, from the randomness and chaos that made up normal life. Ethan began to see his past differently. All those years before the voice, when he had made his own decisions and suffered the consequences. He had been stumbling through life blind, making choice after choice with no guidance, no protection, no way of knowing what was right. And now he had the voice. Now he had certainty. Now he had someone or something that knew better than he did what he should do and where he should go and how he should move through the world. It felt like grace. Like a gift. Like the answer to a question he had not known he was asking. But there were moments, brief and unsettling, when Ethan noticed something else. The voice. At first this did not bother him. The outcomes were always better when he listened. But slowly, so slowly he almost did not notice, Ethan realized he was making fewer decisions on his own. He was waiting for the voice to tell him what to do. And when the voice did not speak, he felt uncertain, paralyzed, afraid of making the wrong choice. One evening in late April, Ethan was sitting at a restaurant with a woman he had been seeing for a few weeks. Her name was Clara and she was talking about her job, something involving marketing and social media campaigns. And Ethan was only half listening because the voice had been quiet all day and he felt anxious in its absence. Clara asked him a question, something about whether he wanted to go away for the weekend. And Ethan opened his mouth to answer, and then the voice came through the soft jazz playing over the restaurant speakers. It said, "Do not answer that question." Ethan closed his mouth. He looked at Clara and smiled apologetically and said he needed to think about it. Clara looked disappointed, but she said okay and changed the subject. The rest of the dinner was fine, pleasant even, but Ethan could not stop thinking about the voice and what it had prevented him from saying. He did not know if he had wanted to say yes or no. He realized he had not even formed the thought before the voice interrupted. It had decided for him, and he had let it. The next time Clara asked about the weekend trip, Ethan said yes without waiting for the voice. It felt like a small act of rebellion, a tiny assertion of autonomy, a way of proving to himself that he was still capable of making his own decisions. They booked a small cabin near a lake, a place Clara had been before and loved. She showed him pictures on her phone, the wooden deck overlooking the water, the stone fireplace inside, the hiking trails that wound through the surrounding forest. She was excited in a way that made Ethan feel guilty because he was not excited. He was anxious, waiting for the voice to weigh in, to approve or disapprove, to tell him whether this was the right choice. But the voice stayed silent. The drive up was beautiful, winding roads through forests that were just beginning to turn green, the air smelling like pine and rain. Clara talked about her week and asked him about his, and Ethan tried to be present, tried to enjoy the moment, tried to ignore the tight feeling in his chest that told him something was wrong. But from the moment they arrived, Ethan felt wrong. The voice had not told him to go. It had not told him not to go either, but its silence felt like disapproval. He kept waiting for it to speak, to tell him what to do next, but it did not. The weekend was a disaster in slow motion. Small things went wrong in a way that felt deliberate, as if the universe itself was punishing him for acting without permission. The cabin was colder than expected and the heating did not work properly. They called the owner, who promised to send someone to fix it, but no one came. Clara tried to make a fire in the fireplace, but the wood was damp and it filled the cabin with smoke. The lake was too cold for swimming, even though it was late spring. They went for a hike on Saturday morning and Clara twisted her ankle on the trail and they had to turn back. That night she got food poisoning from something they ate at a local diner and spent most of Saturday night being sick while Ethan sat uselessly in the next room listening to her suffer. They argued about nothing, stupid things, whether to go hiking or stay inside, whether to leave early or stick it out, whether this trip had been a good idea in the first place. By the time they drove home on Sunday evening, they were barely speaking. Clara stared out the window at the passing trees, and Ethan gripped the steering wheel and thought about all the ways the weekend could have been different if he had just listened, if he had waited for the voice, if he had not tried to make his own choice. A week later, Clara stopped returning his calls. 2 weeks later, she sent him a brief text message saying she thought they should see other people. Ethan read the message 3 times and felt nothing except a kind of grim confirmation. The voice had been right. It was always right. And he had been wrong to ignore it. Ethan understood then that the voice did not prevent bad outcomes. It prevented him from making choices that led to bad outcomes. But in doing so, it also prevented him from making any choices at all. And when he tried to act on his own, when he tried to ignore the voice or move without its guidance, things fell apart. It was not a punishment. It was simply the natural result of living a life where every decision had been made for him. He had become dependent on the voice. He had forgotten how to choose. The voice began to speak more frequently. It gave him instructions in the morning when he woke up, telling him what to eat for breakfast and which route to take to work. It told him when to check his email and when to ignore it. It told him when to speak and when to stay silent. It told him who to talk to and who to avoid. Ethan followed every instruction because he was afraid of what would happen if he did not. And every time he followed the voice, his life became a little smaller, a little quieter, a little more contained. He stopped going out with friends because the voice often told him not to. He stopped pursuing new opportunities at work because the voice said wait. He stopped making plans because the voice would only approve of some of them, and he could not bear the disappointment of choosing wrong. By the time summer arrived, Ethan was living in a routine so precise it felt like a script. He woke at the same time every day. He ate the same meals. He drove the same routes. He spoke to the same people in the same ways. He did not make decisions because the voice made them for him. And his life was calm, safe, free from conflict and failure and regret. But it was also empty. He could not remember the last time he had felt excited about something, or looked forward to an event, or wanted anything strongly enough to take a risk. He existed in a state of perpetual neutrality, moving through his days like a passenger in his own life. One night in July, Ethan was lying in bed unable to sleep when he decided to test the voice. He wanted to know what would happen if he directly disobeyed it. The next morning, he waited for the voice to give him an instruction, and when it told him to take the highway to work, he deliberately took the back roads instead. The drive was fine. Nothing bad happened. He felt a small surge of relief, a tiny spark of defiance that felt like freedom. But when he arrived at work, his manager pulled him aside and told him there had been a scheduling error and Ethan was not needed that day. He should go home. On the drive home, Ethan took the highway and there was no traffic, no delays, nothing to justify his earlier detour. He realized the voice had not been protecting him from danger. It had been protecting him from wasted time, from inefficiency, from the small frustrations that come with making your own choices. He tried again a few days later. The voice told him not to answer a call from an unknown number, and Ethan answered it anyway. It was a robocall, automated and irritating, trying to sell him an extended car warranty. He hung up feeling foolish. The next day, the voice told him to skip lunch, and Ethan ate anyway, a sandwich from the deli down the street. An hour later, he felt nauseous and had to leave work early. The day after that, the voice told him to avoid a coworker in the hallway, and Ethan walked up to the coworker and said hello, and the coworker seemed confused and uncomfortable, and the conversation died after a few awkward seconds. Every time Ethan disobeyed the voice, something small went wrong. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing life-threatening. Just small inconveniences, minor discomforts, the kind of things that happen to everyone all the time. But they added up. And Ethan began to understand that the voice was not controlling his life. It was simply making his life easier by removing the possibility of error. And in exchange, all he had to give up was the ability to choose. By August, Ethan had stopped trying to disobey. It was easier to listen. Simpler. The voice was always right, and he was always wrong when he acted on his own. He accepted this. He stopped questioning it. He stopped feeling bad about it. He told himself he was lucky to have the voice, that most people stumbled through life making mistakes and suffering consequences, and he had been given a gift, a guide, something that kept him safe. He convinced himself that freedom was overrated, that the ability to make your own choices was just another way of saying the ability to make your own mistakes. The voice was better, smarter, more reliable. He trusted it more than he trusted himself. But then one day in early September, the voice changed. It did not change its tone or its volume or its phrasing. It was still calm, still neutral, still factual. But it began to give him instructions that did not make sense. It told him to throw away a shirt he had owned for years. He did. It told him to unsubscribe from a newsletter he enjoyed reading. He did. It told him to delete the contact information for his brother who lived 2 states away. He hesitated for a long time before doing that one, but eventually he did. The voice was always right. It had never led him wrong. If it wanted him to delete his brother's number, there must be a reason. He did not need to understand the reason. He just needed to obey. The voice told him to stop going to the coffee shop he visited every morning. He did. It told him to cancel his gym membership. He did. It told him to stop listening to music while he drove. He did. It told him to turn off his phone for hours at a time. He did. Each instruction removed something from his life, some small connection or habit or pleasure, and Ethan followed every one without question. He trusted the voice more than he trusted his own desires. He believed the voice knew what was best for him even when what was best felt like loss. By October, Ethan's life had shrunk to almost nothing. He went to work, came home, ate simple meals, and sat in his apartment waiting for the voice to tell him what to do next. He did not see friends. He did not call his family. He did not watch television or read books or listen to music. He did not have hobbies or interests or plans. He had the voice. And the voice had become quieter. It spoke less often. Sometimes entire days would pass without a single instruction. Ethan spent those days in a kind of frozen anticipation, afraid to do anything without permission, afraid that the silence meant he was supposed to wait. He felt like a machine that had been paused mid-operation, all his systems running but his actions suspended, waiting for someone to press play. One evening in late October, Ethan was sitting in his living room in the dark because the voice had not told him to turn on the lights when he realized he could not remember the last time he had made a decision on his own. He could not remember the last time he had wanted something. He could not remember what it felt like to have a preference or an opinion or a plan. He had given all of that to the voice. And the voice had accepted it without comment, the way you might accept a gift you did not ask for and did not need. He tried to think of something he wanted to do, some action he could take that would feel like his own, but his mind was blank. Every thought he had felt like it needed approval. Every impulse was followed by a pause, a waiting, a listening for the voice to tell him whether it was allowed. He had trained himself so well to obey that he no longer knew how to want. The voice had not taken his free will. He had given it away, piece by piece, instruction by instruction, until there was nothing left. The voice spoke less and less after that. By November it was barely there at all. Ethan would go days without hearing it. Then a week. Then 2 weeks. He began to panic in the silence. He did not know what to do without the voice. He did not know how to live. He tried to make decisions on his own, but every choice felt wrong. Every action felt like a mistake waiting to happen. He would stand in his apartment for hours trying to decide whether to eat or sleep or shower, paralyzed by the absence of instruction, terrified of choosing incorrectly. He stopped going to work because the voice did not tell him to go. He stopped answering his phone because the voice did not tell him to answer. He stopped eating regular meals because the voice did not tell him when to eat. He was waiting for permission that never came. In early December, Ethan realized the voice was gone. It had been 3 weeks since the last instruction. 3 weeks of waiting in silence, of listening to every sound with desperate attention, of hoping that the next hum of the refrigerator or buzz of the air conditioner would carry the familiar calm neutral tone that had guided him for so long. But there was nothing. Just ordinary noise. Just the meaningless static of a world that did not care whether he moved or stayed still, whether he chose or waited, whether he lived or simply existed. He sat in his apartment surrounded by silence, the kind of deep and total silence that feels like pressure against your eardrums, and he understood that he was alone. The voice had left. It had guided him and controlled him and shaped him into someone who could not function without it, and then it had disappeared. He did not know why. He did not know if it had ever been real or if he had imagined the whole thing. If the voice was something external or something his own mind had created to cope with the fear of making wrong choices. It did not matter. Real or not, the voice had done its job. It had taught him to obey. And now that it was gone, he did not know how to do anything else. Ethan thought about calling someone, asking for help, admitting that something was wrong. He picked up his phone and scrolled through the contacts, looking for a name that felt safe, someone who would not judge him or think he was crazy or ask questions he could not answer. But every name on the list felt like a stranger. The voice had told him to avoid most of these people and he had obeyed, and now the relationships were gone, severed cleanly, impossible to restore. He thought about calling his brother, the one whose number he had deleted months ago at the voice's instruction, but he did not know the number anymore and he could not bring himself to look it up. What would he say? How would he? The voice had controlled his routes and destinations for so long. He could not imagine navigating the world on his own. Every possible direction felt equally meaningless. Every destination felt like a trap. He stood by the door with his hand on the knob for almost an hour, frozen by the simple act of deciding whether to turn it, whether to step outside, whether to move at all. In the end, he did not move. He went back to the couch and sat down and waited for the voice to tell him what to do. And the voice did not speak. He thought about making a simple decision, choosing what to eat or what to wear, just to prove to himself that he still could. But every option felt equally meaningless. He had no preferences left. The voice had erased them. When he looked in the refrigerator, he saw food, but he did not see choices. When he looked in his closet, he saw clothes, but he did not see options. Everything had been reduced to a binary of safe and unsafe, approved and disapproved, allowed and forbidden. And without the voice to tell him which was which, he was paralyzed. He could not move forward. He could not move back. He could only wait in the frozen present, hoping that the voice would return and tell him what to do next, knowing somehow that it would not, that this was the end of something he had not realized he was building toward. Days passed and Ethan stayed in his apartment. He ate when he felt hungry enough that the discomfort outweighed his paralysis. He slept when he was too exhausted to stay awake. He moved through his space like a ghost, drifting from room to room without purpose or direction. He kept waiting for the voice to come back, to tell him what to do, to give him a reason to move. But the voice did not return. And slowly, so slowly he did not notice it happening, Ethan realized something that made his blood feel cold and thin. The voice did not need to speak anymore. It had already won. He understood now that the voice had never been about preventing bad outcomes. It had been about teaching him to stop choosing. Every instruction had been a lesson in obedience. Every prevented disaster had been a reward for compliance. The voice had trained him the way you might train an animal, with patience and consistency and positive reinforcement, until he no longer questioned its authority, until he no longer trusted his own judgment, until he could not imagine acting without permission. And now that the training was complete, the voice no longer needed to guide him. He would guide himself. He would live the rest of his life waiting for instructions that would never come, paralyzed by the absence of the voice, unable to choose, unable to want, unable to be anything other than what the voice had made him. A person who had given up his autonomy so completely that he did not even realize it was gone until it was too late to get it back. Ethan sat in the dark and understood that this was the point. The voice had not wanted to control him forever. It had wanted to teach him to control himself. To make him so afraid of choosing wrong that he would never choose at all. To turn his own fear and doubt and desire for safety into a prison he could never escape because he had built it himself, brick by brick, decision by decision. Every time he had listened instead of acting, every time he had obeyed instead of questioning, every time he had let the voice decide because it was easier than deciding for himself. The prison had no walls. The prison had no guards. The prison was simply him, sitting in his apartment, waiting for permission that would never come, unable to grant himself permission because he had forgotten that he ever had the authority to do so. He thought about the people he had known who lived their whole lives like this, paralyzed by indecision, afraid of making mistakes, waiting for someone or something to tell them what to do. He had always felt sorry for them. He had never understood how they ended up that way. Now he did. They had heard a voice too. Maybe not a literal voice like his. Maybe just the voice of fear, of doubt, of other people's expectations. But it had told them the same thing his voice had told him. Do not choose. Do not risk. Do not try. Wait. Obey. Let someone else decide. And they had listened until listening became the only thing they knew how to do. Ethan stood up from the couch where he had been sitting for hours and walked to the window. Outside, the street was quiet and empty, lit by yellow streetlights that made everything look old and faded. He could leave. He could walk out the door right now and go anywhere and do anything. He could make a choice, any choice, just to prove he still could. But he did not move. He stood at the window looking out at the world he no longer felt part of and waited for the voice to tell him what to do next. And the voice did not speak. It would never speak again. Because it did not need to. Ethan had become the voice. Every thought he had was filtered through the question of whether the voice would approve. Every impulse was checked against the memory of what the voice had taught him. He had internalized it so completely that he could no longer tell the difference between his own thoughts and its instructions. He was not waiting for the voice to return. He was the voice now. He had absorbed it. He had become his own prison guard, his own controller, his own quiet and patient instructor telling him not to move, not to choose, not to want, not to be anything other than safe. This was the horror of it. The voice had not taken anything from him that he had not willingly given. It had not forced him to obey. It had simply made obedience easier than choice and then let him discover how much easier his life could be if he never chose anything at all. And once he understood that, once he accepted it, he had done the rest of the work himself. He had pruned away everything that required decisions. He had isolated himself from anyone who might challenge him. He had reduced his life to a series of simple routines that required no thought and no risk and no autonomy. The voice had started the process, but Ethan had finished it. And now he was living in the world he had created, a world so small and controlled and empty that there was nothing left to do but exist in it, waiting for instructions that would never come because he no longer needed them. Weeks went by and Ethan continued to live in his apartment, going through the motions of survival without ever really living. He ate enough to stay alive. He slept enough to function. He kept himself clean and his space minimally maintained. But he did nothing else. He made no plans. He formed no desires. He sought no connections. He was a person in name only, a shell moving through space, waiting for something that would never happen. He thought sometimes about what he had lost, about the person he used to be before the voice, but those thoughts felt distant and unreal, like memories of someone else's life. He could not imagine being that person again. He could not imagine wanting to be that person again. That person had made mistakes. That person had suffered consequences. That person had been uncertain and afraid and wrong so many times. The voice had saved him from all of that. It had given him peace. And if peace felt like emptiness, if safety felt like death, well, that was just the price of not choosing. That was just what happened when you let someone else live your life for you until there was no you left to live it. One morning in January, almost a year after the voice had first spoken, Ethan woke up and realized he could not remember what his own voice sounded like. He tried to speak out loud, just to hear himself, but the words felt foreign in his mouth, strange and disconnected. He had not spoken to another person in months. He had not even spoken to himself. There had been no need. The voice had spoken for him for so long that he had forgotten how to use his own. He tried to say his name, just his name, but it came out wrong, hesitant and uncertain, like he was trying on someone else's identity. He wondered if he still existed as a person or if he had become something else, something less than human, a machine running on autopilot, a ghost haunting his own life. He looked in the mirror and saw a face he barely recognized. Thin and pale and empty. Eyes that looked past things instead of at them. A mouth that had forgotten how to smile or frown or express anything at all. He had become what the voice wanted him to become. Compliant. Obedient. Safe. He had chosen safety over everything else and safety had consumed him, hollowed him out, left him with nothing but the shell of a life, a routine without meaning, a present without future, an existence without purpose. He had traded his autonomy for the promise that nothing bad would happen, and the promise had been kept. Nothing bad happened anymore. But nothing good happened either. Nothing happened at all. Ethan turned away from the mirror and sat down on the edge of his bed and felt the weight of his choice settle over him like a blanket, heavy and suffocating and permanent. He had done this to himself. The voice had only shown him the way. He had walked the path willingly, eagerly even, because it had seemed easier than the alternative. And now he was at the end of the path and there was nowhere left to go. No way back. No way forward. Just this quiet and terrible and endless present where he would sit and wait and do nothing until eventually his body stopped working and he stopped existing and no one would notice because he had removed everyone from his life who might have cared. He thought about the voice one last time. Not with anger or resentment but with a kind of sad understanding. The voice had not been evil. It had not wanted to hurt him. It had simply offered him something he wanted, safety and certainty and relief from the burden of choosing. And he had accepted the offer without understanding the cost. The cost was himself. The cost was everything that made him a person. The cost was his future, his relationships, his growth, his mistakes, his failures, his successes, his experiences, his life. He had given it all away for the promise that he would never have to choose again. And the promise had been kept. Now Ethan sits in his apartment and waits for nothing. The voice is gone, but it does not matter because he has become the voice. Every moment of every day he hears it in his head, calm and neutral and certain, telling him not to move, not to choose, not to risk, not to try, not to be. And he obeys because obedience is all he knows now. Because the voice taught him so well that he no longer needs a teacher. He has learned the lesson perfectly. He has mastered the art of not living. And in the silence of his apartment, in the absence of the voice that once guided him, Ethan understands the final and most terrible truth. The voice never had to explain itself because the explanation was always obvious. The voice existed to show him what happens when you choose safety over choice, when you value comfort over autonomy, when you let fear guide your life until there is nothing left to guide. The voice existed to teach him that the easiest way to avoid making the wrong choice is to never make any choice at all. And the easiest way to never make any choice at all is to stop being a person who can choose. Ethan is not a person anymore. He is the absence of a person. He is the space where a person used to be. He is the quiet and empty and terrible result of a life lived in perfect obedience to a voice that promised safety and delivered exactly that and nothing more. He is alive, but he is not living. He is breathing, but he is not being. He is the warning no one will ever hear because no one knows he exists. He is the cost of choosing not to choose. He is what happens when you give away your autonomy one small decision at a time until there is nothing left to give and nothing left to be. And somewhere in the static of the world, in the hum of refrigerators and the buzz of air conditioners and the soft background noise of 1,000 lives being lived, the voice moves on to someone else. It speaks calmly, neutrally, without emotion or agenda, offering small instructions that seem helpful, directions that prevent minor disasters, guidance that makes life easier and simpler and safer. And someone listens. Someone always listens. Because the voice is never wrong. Because the voice only wants to help. Because the voice offers something everyone wants: relief from the burden of choosing, freedom from the fear of making mistakes, safety from the consequences of being human. And the voice never explains itself. It never has to. The explanation is in the listening. The truth is in the obedience. The horror is in the realization that comes too late, when the voice is gone and you're still there, waiting for instructions that will never come, living a life that is no longer yours, being a person you no longer are. This is what the voice does. This is what the voice has always done. It does not force. It does not threaten. It does not hurt. It simply offers. And the offer is so reasonable, so logical, so easy to accept that by the time you understand what you have agreed to, you are already too far gone to refuse. You have already become what the voice wanted you to become. Not its victim. Not its slave. Its student. And the lesson is always the same. The safest choice is no choice. The easiest life is no life. The best way to avoid pain is to avoid everything. And once you learn that lesson, once you truly understand it, once you live it so completely that it becomes who you are, the voice can leave. Because you do not need it anymore. You have become it. You are the voice now. And you will spend the rest of your existence sitting in the quiet dark of your own making, waiting for permission to be human again. Permission that will never come because you threw away the part of yourself that could grant it. Ethan knows this now. He sits in his apartment and knows it with a certainty that feels like ice in his veins. He knows he will never leave this place. He knows he will never make another choice. He knows he will never want anything or feel anything or be anything other than this empty and hollow and perfectly safe shell of a person who once had a life and gave it away for the promise that nothing bad would ever happen. And nothing bad has happened. Nothing ever will. Because nothing is happening at all. There is only waiting. Only silence. Only the absence of the voice and the presence of its lesson, burned so deep into his mind that he will carry it with him until his body stops and his thoughts cease and the world moves on without him, never knowing he was there, never knowing what he gave up, never knowing that somewhere in a quiet apartment a man sits in the dark and waits for a voice that will never speak again because he has already heard everything it had to say. And the last thing Ethan thinks before his thoughts become too quiet to hear is this: the voice was right. It was always right. Following it made his life easier, safer, better in every measurable way. And that is the most terrifying thing of all. Because the voice did not lie. It did exactly what it promised. It gave him safety. It gave him certainty. It gave him a life without mistakes or regrets or consequences. It gave him everything he thought he wanted. And in doing so it took everything that mattered. Not through force or deception or cruelty. Through simple, patient, inevitable logic. The logic of choosing safety over risk. The logic of avoiding pain by avoiding life. The logic of letting someone else make your decisions until you forget how to make them yourself. The logic that seems so reasonable, so obvious, so right in the moment that you never stop to ask what you are giving up until it is gone and you are sitting alone in the dark with nothing left but the knowledge that you did this to yourself, one choice at a time, one instruction at a time, one moment of obedience at a time, until there was nothing left to obey and nothing left to choose and nothing left to be. The voice does not need to explain. The voice does not need to justify. The voice does not need to be anything other than what it is. A calm and neutral presence offering an escape from the difficulty of being human. And the escape is real. It works. It delivers exactly what it promises. The only cost is everything. The only price is yourself. And by the time you realize what you have paid, it is too late to ask for a refund because there is no one left to ask and nothing left to return. There is only the silence. Only the waiting. Only the slow and terrible understanding that you are not waiting for the voice to come back. You are waiting for yourself to come back. And you never will. Because you gave yourself away. Piece by piece. Choice by choice. Until there was nothing left to give and nothing left to lose and nothing left to be but this quiet and empty and perfectly safe absence of a life, this existence without living, this waiting without purpose, this breathing without being. And somewhere in the world another person hears the voice for the first time and thinks it is helpful and follows its instruction and feels relief when something bad does not happen and begins to listen more carefully, begins to wait for guidance, begins to trust the voice more than they trust themselves. And the cycle continues. The voice moves through the world like a whisper through static, finding people who are afraid of choosing wrong, people who are tired of making mistakes, people who want safety more than they want freedom, people who will trade their autonomy for the promise of an easier life. And the voice gives them exactly what they want. And the voice takes exactly what they are. And the voice leaves them exactly where Ethan is now, sitting in the dark, waiting for nothing, being nothing, knowing that they chose this, that they wanted this, that they got exactly what they asked for and lost everything they did not know they were giving away. This is the horror. Not the voice. The choice. Not the control. The surrender. Not the loss. The willing gift. Not the ending. The middle, the long and quiet middle where you are still alive but no longer living, still breathing but no longer being, still there but no longer you. The horror is knowing you did this to yourself. The horror is understanding that the voice was right and you were wrong to listen. The horror is realizing that safety is not the same as living and comfort is not the same as happiness and ease is not the same as meaning. The horror is sitting in the absence of your own life and knowing that you put yourself there, that you chose this, that you wanted this, that you thought this was better. The horror is the silence after the voice is gone and the knowledge that the silence will never end because you have become the silence. You are the absence now. You are the void that the voice created by teaching you to erase yourself, slowly and carefully and completely, until there was nothing left to erase and nothing left to be erased from. The horror is the understanding that comes too late. The horror is the regret that has no outlet. The horror is the life that continues after the living has stopped. The horror is you, sitting there, waiting, for nothing, forever. And the voice moves on.